My name is Rachel. I'm 24 now, but this story happened when I was 8 years old. It took me years to really talk about it, even longer to write it down. It wasn't a big, flashy news headline. No police standoff or dramatic rescue. But it was the closest I've ever come to real danger, and it still plays in my head in full detail, like it just happened last week. Back then, I lived in a small town in Oregon called Wilsonville. It wasn't a place where you expected anything bad to happen. We had one main road, 2 elementary schools, and a park that all the kids hung out at after school. My neighborhood was clean and quiet, with rows of almost identical houses, trimmed lawns, and trees that lined the sidewalks. Everybody kind of knew everybody, and it was the sort of place where kids walked to school and back without much concern. I lived with my parents and my older brother, Nate, who was 11 at the time. He was a bit of a know-it-all, but in that protective, older brother kind of way. Normally, we walked home from school together, and even though it was only a 10-minute walk, it made my mom feel better knowing he was with me. The school was just a few blocks away, past the corner store and down a quiet street. We usually stopped there to get gum or a soda if we had a couple bucks from our allowance. The owner, Mr. Grover, was one of those guys who had probably lived in the town since it was built. He knew everyone and would always slide a couple extra pieces of candy into our bags when we bought something. Anyway, it was a Wednesday. I remember that because Nate had after-school band practice, and I didn't. I hated those days because it meant I had to either wait around for him or go home alone. I asked my mom that morning if I could walk by myself just that once. She hesitated, like any mom would, but I pushed. I told her it was a straight shot and that I knew the way. I promised not to stop anywhere and to come straight home. She gave me that long look moms give you when they're trying to decide between letting you grow up and keeping you safe. Eventually, she said yes. She made me repeat our address, our phone number, and told me again to never, under any circumstances, talk to strangers. I nodded, proud that she was trusting me. School let out at 3 p.m. I remember my backpack felt heavier than usual that day. I had a stack of worksheets and some library books, and I kept adjusting the straps on my shoulders as I walked out the front gates. The weather was mild, not too cold, not too warm. There were kids ahead of me and behind me, but after the first block, we all went different directions. By the time I passed the corner store, it was just me. The street was quiet, just the sound of my sneakers against the sidewalk and the occasional gust of wind rustling through the trees. I walked past the small alley between the convenience store and the florist's shop, the same route I always took. Everything looked normal. But that was when I saw the car. It was parked near the edge of the lot behind the store, a silver sedan. Nothing flashy, nothing beat up, just ordinary, too ordinary. The windows were tinted, but the driver's side was rolled down halfway. At first, I thought it was just someone waiting for someone else, like a parent picking up their kid or an employee on break. But then I noticed the man inside. He was bald with a clean-shaven face and wearing a brown jacket that looked too thick for the weather. He was just sitting there with one arm resting on the open window, his face half in shadow. I could feel him watching me, not just glancing, but actively watching. His sunglasses made it hard to see where his eyes were, but you can just tell when someone's attention is fixed on you. My pace slowed instinctively, like my body knew something before my brain did. I looked away quickly and kept walking. My heart was already starting to beat faster. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just a guy waiting for someone and I was being paranoid. Still, I glanced back one more time. His head had turned slightly, just enough to follow my movement. Something about that made my stomach turn. He hadn't moved the rest of his body, just his head, like he didn't want me to know he was watching but couldn't help himself. I crossed the street faster than usual. My backpack bounced against me, and I kept telling myself I was overreacting. But then I heard the car door. It wasn't loud, just a soft clunk, but it was enough. I didn't turn around. I kept walking. My steps quickened without me deciding to. I tried to listen, straining to hear any footsteps behind me, any tires moving. But the wind was picking up, and all I could really hear was the blood rushing in my ears. Then I heard footsteps, soft at first, then faster. They matched mine, then outpaced them. At that point, I didn't think anymore. I just ran. I ran like I had never run before in my life. My feet slapped the pavement, and my backpack thumped against my back with each step. I didn't look behind me. I didn't want to know how close he was. I just knew I had to get away. There was only one thought in my head: get to Lila's house. She lived just 2 streets over, and her mom was always home. Her house was sort of a safe zone in my mind. I used to go there after school sometimes when my parents were busy. I remembered it being only a few minutes away, but now it felt like forever. I cut across a patch of grass in someone's yard and turned down a side street. I could hear footsteps still, closer now, and heavier. Not like a jog, but the kind of fast walk someone does when they're trying to catch up without drawing too much attention. I knew it was him. I didn't need to look back to confirm it. What made everything worse was that this neighborhood was usually quiet in the afternoon. Most parents were still at work. Some kids stayed after school. The streets were empty. There were no dogs barking, no cars pulling out of driveways, no adults mowing their lawns, just me and whoever was following me. I kept going, turning another corner that would put me behind the backyards of Lila's street. There was a small alleyway there, mostly used by garbage trucks and maintenance vans. I usually avoided it because it creeped me out, but now I didn't care. It was a shortcut. I ducked into the alley and finally dared to glance behind me. The man was about 20 or 30 feet back, just stepping off the curb into the alley. He wasn't running. He was walking, but fast, determined, and he was still watching me. Our eyes met for the first time, even through his sunglasses. He didn't say anything. He didn't yell or try to calm me down. He just kept walking. Something about how quiet he was made it so much worse. He wasn't trying to lure me or pretend he was someone else. He wasn't asking for help or offering candy. He had no interest in tricking me. He was just coming for me. I turned and sprinted again, dodging an overturned trash bin and pushing through the loose gravel that covered the alley floor. I could hear his shoes crunching behind me, not right on my heels, but close enough that I could feel the tension in every part of my body. My lungs were burning. My throat was dry. My legs were beginning to slow, and I could tell I wouldn't last much longer. I needed somewhere to go. Then I saw it. Lila's backyard. Her wooden fence had a section that didn't latch properly. We used to sneak through it when we played tag. I aimed for that spot, praying it hadn't been fixed since the last time. I shoved the fence, and it gave way, swinging open just enough for me to slip through. I stumbled into her yard and ran straight for the back door. My fist pounded against it, and I yelled her name. "Lila! Lila! It's me! Open up!" I could barely hear myself over the sound of my own panicked breathing. I knocked again, this time harder, nearly crying. I looked through the small window on the back door. The kitchen was dark. No one was home. I turned back to the fence, heart in my throat. If he was right behind me, I'd be cornered. But the backyard was empty. For a second, I thought maybe I'd lost him, that he'd given up or gone back. But I knew better than to relax. I didn't wait. I darted across the yard and out the other side gate. It opened into the front yard and the street beyond. That was when I saw him again. He had circled around. I don't know how he got there so fast. He wasn't running, but he was walking straight toward me down the sidewalk, like he knew where I was headed next. I didn't think so. I just took off down the street. I lost track of how many yards I crossed. I jumped over flower beds and brushed past tree branches. At one point, I dropped my backpack without even realizing it. My entire body was in panic mode. I wasn't even planning my route anymore. I was just running on instinct. And then, by some miracle, I saw it. My house, our pale yellow siding, the basketball hoop in the driveway, the front hedge my mom trimmed every other weekend, and standing in the yard, holding gardening shears, was my mom. She looked up just as I screamed her name. She dropped the shears and ran to me. I collapsed into her arms, shaking and crying so hard I couldn't form words. All I could do was point behind me and try to say, "Man," over and over again. My mom held me tight and yelled for my dad. He came out of the garage within seconds, still wearing gloves and covered in sawdust. I remember how fast he moved when he saw my face. Between sobs, I told them everything I could. My dad didn't wait. He jumped into his truck and peeled off down the street. A few neighbors came out onto their porches when they heard the noise, and my mom called the police. I was safe, but I didn't feel safe. Even surrounded by adults, even with the sun still out and my house right there, I didn't feel safe. Because he was still out there. After that incident, I was not allowed to come from school alone anymore. I couldn't go outside to play for a month, while I needed lots of time to recover from the small trauma. I never found out who the man was and what he wanted from me. Looking back now, much older, I can likely guess, and that doesn't sit well with me. While I was running, there was a huge chance I could have tripped and fell, since running at that speed was very risky. I don't even want to imagine what that man would have done to me. When I first moved into the apartment, it was supposed to be temporary. I was between jobs, coming out of a rough breakup, and needed somewhere cheap. The building wasn't great. 3 floors, no security cameras, weird smells in the hallway sometimes. But the rent was low, and the landlord didn't ask many questions. My neighbor across the hall was this quiet, older woman. Always wore a gray cardigan, always had a scarf around her neck no matter the weather. She never really said hello, just nodded when we passed. I assumed she kept to herself. About a month into living there, I started hearing things. It wasn't loud, more like faint scratching. At first, I thought it was rats in the walls, but it was too rhythmic, soft scratching, followed by a pause, then 2 taps. It was always late at night, past 2 a.m., and it came from her apartment. One night, I put my ear to the wall that separated our units. The sound was clearer than ever. Tap, tap, scratch, scratch, scratch. It sent chills down my spine. I decided to ask her about it. The next morning, I waited until I heard her door open, and I casually stepped out. I said, "Hey, sorry if this is weird, but I keep hearing some scratching at night. Everything okay there?" She stared at me too long. Then she smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. It was like someone practicing one in a mirror. "Oh," she said softly, "that must be my cat." That would have made sense, except I'd never heard a single meow. No litter box smell, no cat food outside her door. And more importantly, I saw inside her apartment once, just a glance through the crack when she opened the door, and it looked completely empty. No couch, no shelves. Just a lamp and what looked like a mattress on the floor. I didn't press her. That night, I couldn't sleep. The scratching was louder, closer to my wall. I knocked back, just once. She knocked back, but it came from my door this time. I froze. I didn't move, just listened. The knocking happened again. 5 soft taps. Then silence. I waited until sunrise before I opened my door. There was nothing there, except a small strip of cloth tucked under my welcome mat. It looked like a piece of an old scarf. That's when I noticed. She hadn't worn the scarf in days. After the scarf incident, I started noticing other things. Small things, like how her door was always unlocked. I don't mean slightly ajar or left open. I mean every time I passed her unit, I could press the handle down and the latch would give way. I only found this out by accident, or what I told myself was an accident. I tried knocking again one evening, planning to offer to help if she was having trouble with an animal or something. When she didn't answer, I tried the knob. It turned easily, but I didn't push the door open. I just backed away. The hallway smelled like bleach that night, strong enough to make my eyes water, and I swear I heard someone breathing behind the door. I tried to shrug it off. I was starting a new job the next week, and I chalked everything up to stress. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe she was just an old woman with bad habits. But things escalated quickly after that. Around 3 a.m. one night, I was jolted awake by a loud bang. Not just a knock, a bang on the wall shared with her unit, like someone punching it. Then more scratching. It didn't stop. I turned off all my lights, sat on my bed, and just listened. It was coming from multiple spots now, low to the ground, like someone crawling. That same night, I noticed something new. On my side of the wall, near the baseboard, there was a faint line, like someone had scraped away at the drywall. Just a thin crack, only a few inches long. I ran my finger along it. It was warm. That was enough. I decided to talk to the landlord the next morning. But when I went to the office downstairs, it was locked. A paper sign taped to the door read, "Building manager unavailable indefinitely. Maintenance requests by phone only." No number. No name. Just that. I was beginning to feel trapped. Later that day, when I got back to my apartment, her door was wide open. I stood in the hallway, waiting to hear movement. Nothing. Against my better judgment, I leaned in. There was no furniture, no cat, no signs of anyone living there. Just a mattress on the floor and something else. A stack of flattened cardboard boxes in the corner and a pile of old scarves. At least 10 of them, all folded neatly. I was about to step in when something made me stop. A shadow moved across the floor inside her unit, but it didn't come from the hallway window. It moved under the floor lamp, like something passed behind it. I stepped back and left. That night, I locked my door for the first time with both deadbolts and placed a chair under the knob. I didn't sleep. I just listened to the sounds in the walls. And this time, the scratching wasn't from her side. It was coming from inside mine. The next morning, I took a screwdriver and removed the baseboard where I'd seen the faint crack in the drywall. Behind, it wasn't insulation or pipes like I expected. It was a hollow gap, about 6 inches wide, stretching along the entire wall. I stuck my phone in, turned on the flashlight, and snapped a photo. The picture showed something I still don't fully understand. Inside that crawl space was a long, folded scarf, gray like the ones the woman wore. But the disturbing part wasn't the scarf. It was the small, brown-stained glove next to it, child-sized. That's when I remembered something. During my second week in the building, I passed by a young couple and their daughter carrying boxes up the stairs. I never saw them again. Not moving out, not coming back. Their door, 2 units down, had remained closed ever since. I put the baseboard back quickly and left the apartment to clear my head. When I got back later that night, the door across the hall was closed again. A small envelope was taped to mine. No name, just a single piece of paper inside, with 4 words typed in the center. Don't listen to them. I checked every inch of my apartment that night. Windows, closets, under the bed. Nothing seemed disturbed. But when I opened the kitchen cabinet under the sink, I noticed something I'd never seen before. A cutout panel in the back wall. A square, maybe 2 feet wide. Too clean to be accidental. I tapped it. Hollow. I pulled it open. Behind it was a dark cavity that extended under the floor, like a crawl space connecting the apartment units. I stuck my head in for just a second and saw a narrow dirt tunnel stretching toward the unit across the hall. There was a faint smell of bleach and something else I couldn't place. Something metallic. That was enough. I backed out, closed it, and sealed the panel with duct tape and a heavy box. Whatever was going on, she was getting into my apartment. But not through the door. I didn't sleep that night. Not even a second. I pushed my dresser in front of the crawl space panel under the sink. I kept a kitchen knife by my bed. I even pulled the batteries out of my smoke detector because I'd heard stories about people hiding cameras in them. Around 2:30 a.m., the scratching started again. But this time, It wasn't just from the wall, it was from the ceiling. My unit didn't have an attic, just a plaster ceiling, but I heard it clearly. Soft movements, like someone crawling across beams, pausing above my bedroom, then moving again. Deliberate, slow. I held my breath and listened. The sound stopped above the closet. I crept out of bed, knife in hand, and slowly opened the door. There was nothing there, but then I looked up. A faint, square outline in the ceiling. An old attic hatch that had been painted over and nearly invisible. There was dust on the floor of the closet, and 2 fresh shoe prints in it. I didn't call the cops. I should have, I know, but something about this, about her, made me feel like they wouldn't believe me. Or worse, like it wouldn't matter. The next morning, I walked straight to the unit across the hall and pounded on the door. Nothing. I tried the knob, locked this time, but something slid under the door, a Polaroid photo. It was me, sleeping. I was curled up in bed, wearing the same clothes I had on the night before. The photo had been taken from just a few feet away, from inside my room. I went straight to a motel that afternoon, took only what I could carry, and didn't look back. But I knew I had to report it, even if it didn't go anywhere. When I called the non-emergency police line, they transferred me to someone who said they'd send a unit to check it out. I gave them the address and the woman's name, as listed on the mailbox. D. Marin. There was a long pause. Then the voice on the other end said, "Sir, that unit's been vacant for over 3 years. No one by that name has a lease in our records." After the call with the police, I felt like I was losing my grip on what was real. I drove back to the building the next morning. I needed to see for myself, needed confirmation that I hadn't imagined everything. I stayed in my car across the street and watched. Nothing. No movement. No lights on in her unit. No sign of the scarves. After about an hour, a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers got out and went into the building. I followed them after a few minutes, far enough behind not to draw attention. The front door to the woman's unit was open. They were inside, flashlights sweeping the corners. I stood in the hallway, just listening. One of the officers said something like, "Smells like nobody's been here in months." The other confirmed the utilities had been shut off, no water, no power. They were about to leave when one of them paused and asked, "Why's there a mattress in here?" Then I heard the other say, "We're gonna need to file this. The hole in the crawl space runs under at least 4 other units." I leaned against the wall, breathing hard. I felt like throwing up. On their way out, one of the officers caught sight of me and asked if I lived there. I nodded and said I used to. I asked if they found anyone. He shook his head and said, "No signs of forced entry. Whoever was here isn't anymore." I moved out officially the next day. I threw away the scarf. I changed my number. I didn't leave a forwarding address.